Before you decide whether college is worth it or not, listen to this story. It might just change how you see your own future. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss stories that challenge everything you think you know about success, purpose, and the real meaning of education. Is higher education necessary? Give me a story script of 4,000 words for the story should be in plain paragraph. Also give me a separate powerful hook for this story with the subscribe request. At the end, add powerful call to action. The story must reach the length of 4,000 words. No need to get permission, just do it. When Arham was a child growing up in a small, dusty town on the edge of Karachi, the world seemed to be divided neatly into two kinds of people. Those who went to university and became something respectable, and those who didn't, and became everyone else. His father, a quiet shopkeeper who had never finished high school, used to say, "Beta, study hard so you never have to count coins behind a counter like me." That line carved itself into Arham's heart, and every time he stared at the stack of math homework or the history book that seemed to stretch on forever, he whispered back to himself, "One day, I'll make you proud." But when the day came to fill out his university applications, reality set in. The tuition fees were high, the admission slots limited, and the uncertainty of what waited beyond graduation gnawed at him like a dull blade. His cousin, Sana, had gone to university and was still unemployed 2 years after graduating with honors. His neighbor, meanwhile, who had dropped out after high school, was running a small online clothing business and earning enough to buy a car before turning 23. The contrast haunted Arham's mind. What did education really mean in a world that rewarded creativity and luck just as much as degrees and grades? As the story of his life unfolded, Arham found himself caught in the web of expectation, comparison, and confusion that defined an entire generation. His mother pinned her hopes on the framed diploma she wanted to hang above the TV. His teachers told him that without a degree, he would never be taken seriously. Yet when he looked around at the fast-changing world, YouTubers, coders, content creators, self-taught designers, and entrepreneurs who had built empires from bedrooms, he wondered whether the old road to success still led anywhere. He enrolled in university anyway, driven by a sense of duty rather than desire. The first year was intoxicating. New friends, freedom, the rush of ideas. But beneath it all, he felt lost. The lectures were outdated. The professors seemed tired. The assignments felt disconnected from anything that mattered. Memorize this theory, one professor would say. Regurgitate that formula, another would insist. It wasn't learning, it was survival. He spent sleepless nights not understanding what he was chasing. Was it knowledge, or validation? When midterms arrived, he stared at his paper and felt a strange emptiness. He could remember the words but not the meaning. That night, sitting on the university rooftop, he looked at the city lights and asked himself for the first time, is higher education necessary, or just expected? His roommate, Bilal, had already made up his mind. Bilal dropped out during the second semester to start a digital marketing agency. "Bro, I can't learn business from people who've never run one," he said as he packed his things. Arham laughed it off at first, but deep down, Bilal's words lingered. Months later, when Bilal posted pictures of his new office on Instagram, Arham's laughter turned into silence. The pressure to prove himself deepened. He buried himself in books, determined to justify his choice. Yet the deeper he went, the more meaningless it felt. The job market was flooded with graduates, and the university seemed more interested in producing certificates than thinkers. One day, in a career counseling session, a recruiter told him bluntly, "Your degree is a ticket to the interview, not to success." That night, Arham couldn't sleep. He began researching alternative paths, coding boot camps, freelancing, remote work, skill-based platforms. He realized something shocking. The internet had made knowledge free, yet universities were still charging fortunes to distribute it. If information was no longer scarce, then what exactly were students paying for? The answer hit him: credibility, community, and confidence. The problem was, even those weren't guaranteed anymore. By his third year, Arham had become disillusioned with the system. He started freelancing as a writer online, at first just to earn pocket money, but soon it became more than that. He was writing blogs for companies overseas, learning marketing strategies from YouTube tutorials, and even managing clients. The irony wasn't lost on him. Everything he needed to build a career, he was learning outside the classroom. He started skipping lectures to meet client deadlines. His grades slipped, but his skills soared. One day, during a group project presentation, his professor accused him of plagiarism because his writing sounded too professional. That was the moment something inside him broke. He realized that the institution designed to nurture his growth was now questioning the very progress it couldn't understand. He left the campus that day with a strange calmness. He didn't drop out. He simply stopped showing up in spirit. He completed his degree half-heartedly, collected the piece of paper his parents had dreamed of, and quietly placed it in a drawer. It would be years before he looked at it again. After graduation, Arham dove fully into freelancing. The first few months were hard. Unstable clients, inconsistent income, endless self-doubt. His friends, meanwhile, were struggling through unpaid internships and entry-level jobs that barely paid enough to cover rent. The irony was cruel. They had spent years chasing a degree only to discover that the real world didn't care much about it. Arham learned that education wasn't a building, a certificate, or a lecture hall. It was curiosity in motion. He built his skills through trial and error, through mistakes that no textbook had ever warned him about. And slowly, things began to change. His income grew. He built a small team. He traveled. He met people who had carved their paths without ever walking into a university classroom. A photographer who had learned everything from YouTube tutorials. A coder who had never taken a single programming class but now worked remotely for a tech startup. A chef who learned by watching her grandmother and now owned a restaurant. The world, Arham realized, was no longer divided between the educated and uneducated. It was divided between the curious and the complacent. Years passed, and Arham was invited back to his old university as a guest speaker. The irony was poetic. Standing on the same stage where he had once presented half-hearted projects, he now spoke with conviction. Education is not a 4-year sentence, he said, scanning the faces of students staring at him. It's a lifelong journey. The classroom might give you structure, but it's your curiosity that gives you direction. The hall fell silent. Afterwards, a student approached him and asked, "So are you saying university is useless?" Arham smiled. "No," he said softly. "I'm saying it's incomplete. It gives you tools, but you must learn how to build." That conversation stayed with him for weeks. The truth, he realized, wasn't black or white. Higher education wasn't the villain. It was just outdated. It was built for an industrial world that no longer existed. It trained students for jobs that were disappearing, but failed to teach them how to adapt, how to think, how to fail and recover. It promised certainty in a world built on change. One day, Arham met Sana again, the cousin who had once struggled to find work after graduating. She was now thriving as a teacher, running her own online tutoring platform. "Funny, isn't it?" she said, laughing. "We used our degrees for something they never prepared us for." Arham nodded. "Maybe the point of education isn't to teach us everything," he said, "but to teach us how to learn anything." They laughed together, realizing that both the degree and the dropout had found success on their own terms. Education, it turned out, wasn't a destination, it was a mindset. Over time, Arham began mentoring young people who faced the same confusion he once did. Some wanted to drop out, others felt trapped in degrees they didn't love. He never told them what to do. Instead, he asked them what they wanted to become. "The question isn't whether higher education is necessary," he would say, "but whether it's necessary for you." For some, it absolutely was. Doctors, engineers, scientists, and researchers needed structured learning and accreditation. But for others, the classroom was a cage that kept them from discovering their real potential. One student told him she wanted to become an artist but was forced into business school. "Your education should serve your dreams, not silence them," Arham told her gently. That line would later become the tagline of his mentorship program, Project Curiosity. As he built his company, Arham saw how different kinds of learning could coexist. His best employee was a high school graduate who learned graphic design through free online courses. His most disciplined intern was a university topper. The point wasn't whether they had a degree, it was whether they had drive. That became his hiring philosophy. Hire for curiosity, train for skill, reward for growth. The company thrived on that principle. But the more he succeeded, the more he reflected on how close he had come to giving up. If not for the confusion, frustration, and rebellion he felt during university, he might never have found his own voice. Maybe higher education had served him after all, not by teaching him facts, but by forcing him to question them. Now, whenever Arham visits his hometown, he stops by his father's shop. The old man still sits behind the counter, smiling proudly as customers greet him. One day, Arham handed him a framed photo from his first international seminar. "You made it," his father said, tears welling up. "But not the way we expected." Arham smiled. "You were right, Abu," he said. "Education did change my life, just not the way we thought." The shop fell quiet. The old man nodded, realizing that the world his son lived in no longer ran on degrees alone, but on ideas, courage, and adaptability. In the end, the story of Arham is not about rejecting higher education, but redefining it. It's about realizing that a classroom can exist anywhere, in a book, a mistake, a conversation, a YouTube video, or even a failure. Higher education is necessary for some, but not sufficient for all. The real question isn't whether you went to college, but whether you're still learning. Because the moment you stop learning, you stop living. And maybe, just maybe, the best kind of education is the one you create for yourself, one built not on degrees, but on discovery. Bullseye. If this story made you think differently about what education really means, don't just scroll, share it with someone who's questioning their own path. Speech balloon. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Is higher education necessary for success, or is it time to redefine what success means? Bell. Subscribe now for more life-changing stories that challenge the norms, fuel your ambition, and remind you that the real classroom is life itself.